Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Madeline Gallucci, Marketing Director, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on current issues that engage them. This afternoon, join Maximilíano Durón, Senior Editor at Art News, for the 2023 edition of the Art Critics Forum, which will focus on supporting art critics of color. Max will be in conversation with three leading art critics, Raquel Gutiérrez, Camille and Jasmine Amussen, to discuss their career paths, how they approach their writing, the struggles they faced along the way, and what they need most today. This panel is presented in partnership with Art in America and Critical Minded, an initiative to invest in cultural critics of color, co-founded by the Nathan Cummings Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Maximilíano Durón, and I'm a senior editor at Art News. And we have three amazing, esteemed panelists who have all agreed to forego long bios so we can just get into it. But they are all very amazing critics, and I really encourage you to not only look up their work, but read it, share it, and support it. And this does factor in, but Raquel is based in Tucson, Camille's based in Chicago, and Jasmine's based in Atlanta, and that will be relevant later on in the conversation. And I just want to give a shout out to Critical Minded, who agreed to partner with us. I was part of their original convening in 2017, and it was a very transformative experience for me, and that I hope we can continue that legacy today with this panel. And so we're going to get started. So the first question that I have for all three of our panelists, which they'll have images that'll explain kind of how they got into art and art criticism. And Raquel is going to lead us off.
All right. Thank you so much, Max. And it's amazing to be here with Camille and Jasmine and here in Chicago. This is my first time at the Expo. And so, we wanted to introduce ourselves by way of some of the contemporary art and artists that we have written about. This is a performance bust columns that took place in the fall of I'm not an art historian, and I know we'll get into that also. And also, I think I'm just 2017, 2018. It had to have been 2018.
I think that's right.
Yeah, 2018. And this is Rafa Esparza performing in Sightline to the White House. And so it's a performance where he has encased himself in concrete and is trying to break himself out, and it was presented in collaboration with Ballroom Marfa and Performance Space New York. And so I've written a lot about Rafa Esparza. One of the ways in which his work has allowed me to write about artists and to think about their work across issues of identity and history and labor. And so I'm from Los Angeles, he's from Los Angeles, but I moved to Tucson in 2016. And for me, this work is really interesting and important, and also corresponds to, that transformative power and work around the founding of Critical Minded in 2017. These works that took place during this really just, I don't know if y'all remember the Trump era, the 45 era, and all the ways in which we've had to sort of endure and seen just various forms of dispossession from policies from that administration. And so a lot of my work just looks at the art and politics, and sort of the ways in which it's not identities, but the way that these identities are parsed out through histories of protest and histories of agitation. And we'll get into that, but this is my introduction to you all. So thank you much.
So this is a painting by Chicago-born artist Turquoise Dyson, and it's called Presence Takes Courage for a Body to Get Down There. And I kind of arrived at art criticism from a space of necessity. And it began with me kind of writing and finding language to grapple and make sense of the worldly condition that I was born into. And it has been really the lineage of Black feminist thought that I've been able to locate that kind of lexicon in. And as I was beginning, there would be particular artworks that I'd respond to viscerally and immediately, and the words would just kind of start pouring out. I encountered this painting and was completely stunned into silence, which was a really uncomfortable thing for me. It's a demanding painting, and I think it's encrypted. And so the forms you see are actually derived from what Turquoise calls moments of Black spatial genius. So the box or the rectangle or square that we see right there is a reference to Henry Box Brown, someone who constructed an architecture of liberation quite literally, in that he built a box, placed himself in it, and shipped himself across the Mason-Dixon line. And then the triangular or trapezoidal forms you see reference Harriet Jacobs, a woman who hid in a garret in an attic for 7 years in order to ensure the freedom of herself and her children. And then you'll also see kind of curvatures, and that references the hold of a slave ship that Anthony Barnes disguised himself within and also shipped himself to freedom in a similar way. And so this was kind of the first painting that helped me understand that there's a responsibility to kind of grappling with that silence and finding a sense of reverence within the works that, again, are more challenging or more demanding. And so I went back to the Art Institute every day for a period of 2 months, and to the chagrin of the gallery attendants, would sit on the floor in front of this painting and kind of wait for it to reveal itself to me. And amidst that process, I was listening to a podcast by Adrienne Marie Brown and Autumn Brown called How to Survive the End of the World. And in it, they interview a theorist, a poet, a thinker that I really adore named Alexis Pauline Gumbs. And she came up with this notion of Black feminist breathing and what might happen on a somatic level in the body if we were to incant moments and phrases that kind of affirm the fundamental value of Black femme existence. And so as I was walking to the museum for like my daily moment of prayer with this painting, I decided that I would incant the title, Presence Takes Courage for a Body to Get Down There, over and over and over again until the painting opened itself to me. And it did. And then I essentially wrote an essay about that experience that you can find on Momus, and also invited 7 of my friends to come and meditate with me in front of the work after hours once the museum was closed. And I think this piece has been really important to me because it has reminded me of the importance of embodied knowledge and the position I hold within that as a Black woman, and how in that moment of, again, incanting the title until the painting opened itself, it kind of, again, demanded that I didn't come to the painting as this omniscient, all-knowing voice that would extract its meaning, but rather allow the painting to ultimately dictate the words that I would write about it. So that is my introduction, and I will pass it off to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Critical Minded. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. I am a born and bred Southerner. I was born in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I was the first free Black child born there in 100 years. And I spent most of my time between there and New Orleans, where my father is from. And I've lived in Atlanta for the past 13 years. And what really got me, first of all, like, concerned about the view of others have of me and where I live, is really summed up in this New Yorker cover from 1996. If you set foot in Atlanta for just even a second and you say the New Yorker cover, everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. This is such a powerful motivator for this churning that Atlanta was going through around that time. They won the Olympics. They won the World Series. There was like a lot of stuff going on, and it was a big moment of civic pride that didn't have anything to do with the assassination of Martin Luther King, or like it didn't, it was like a really positive, we're trying to move forward. And then this is the image that was seen around the world as like, this is what Americans think of Southerners. And first off, howdy, that's not ours. That's Texas. So you're not even getting the lingo right when you're trying to be offensive. Also, like, farming, Atlanta is the, like, 8th largest metro area. There's 7 million people. So Mr. Farmer guy, not even the right sort of condescension. Like, it's not even in the right way. And since I've been here in Chicago, I also feel that Chicago, like other places that aren't New York, feels that this sort of like provincialism, that like everything ends once you hit New Jersey. This sort of like, this image sticks in my head whenever I'm in a panel like this, or whenever I'm trying to convince somebody that like Southern art is worth like looking at and being interested in, because I'm fighting against this picture still.
So I'm going to skip around to a question because I think that's a great transition. When I was thinking of panelists who I would love to be in conversation with, I wanted to make sure that there was geographic diversity within this panelist, because I want to get away from the idea that art is only created in New York and Los Angeles in this country, and that that's the only place that criticism is taking place. So I would love for you all to speak on, what your experience has been being based in cities that are not New York and Los Angeles, that often don't, when editors like myself are trying to commission exhibitions like that, it's, for example, right now, I'm sure the commissions are, we need someone to review the Dali show at the Art Institute, as opposed to the Gio Schwabi show that's downstairs. And I think that that is a really important topic that we need to be talking about when we're talking about art criticism in this country. And I don't know, maybe Camille, since I talked about Chicago, you want to go first?
So I think one of the benefits of being here is the pace of day-to-day existence is a lot slower than it is in New York, but I still have the kind of like defibrillator shock of energy that one gets from living in a city and constantly kind of encountering, either on purpose or at random, works that move me. But I think in terms of the demands of what it would mean to build a life that is conducive to writing and write in ways that are conducive to a certain set of living conditions, being here allows me to focus, quite simply, quite practically. There's a lot less noise to tune out. I also think there's something very special about being on a city that, from its origin, has been adamant about protecting the lakefront and making sure that all citizens kind of like have that space built into the landscape to speculate. But the other thing about the slower pace is that it often feels like there's a ceiling here. Like there is a height you can rise to and then you're kind of blocked off after that. Where perhaps in New York and LA, I've never been to LA, but my experience in New York has been that there is no ceiling. One can kind of develop and expand, ad infinitum. So something that I'm grappling with currently is what it might mean to explode that ceiling that I often find in Chicago. But I also think the coasts are seductive in the way that you can access a kind of ubiquity and a kind of ubiquity of your work. I think it's harder to proliferate things here because it's also like, okay, why would we write about Gio Schwabi when like Faith Ringgold's having her solo show in Paris right now, for example. So I think my commitment to remain here and to be here is also an investment in the inalienable value that I find in this city and the artists that also choose to live here and stay here.
Raquel, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. So I live in Tucson. I've lived there since 2016, and I'm from Los Angeles, and I started writing in Los Angeles about Los Angeles writers. artists. I'm the writer. And but it's interesting too because even maybe up until '03, '04, Los Angeles wasn't even considered an art center. I mean, it is, and it always has been, but something happened around performance art in Los Angeles. It just started getting really exciting, and New York, everybody was studying performance studies, and so so that that conversation felt organic, and suddenly we started seeing artists in LA getting programmed into the new museum and other sort of launch pads. But it's interesting. Tucson is super slow, so slow, so much slower than Chicago. Even being in Chicago and driving here, I have to call on my defensive driving skills because I have a rental. Body memory is a thing. And so it's so Tucson has, for me, provided a space to really just tune out. It's so quiet, and there's so much more space for more contemplation, more consideration. But it's not, what I'm doing in the interior West isn't new. We have a lot of Easterners who come to the West and partake in that, our own sort of artistic manifest destinies. And so from Los Angeles to Tucson, to Marfa, to El Paso, I'm really interested in these histories of migration, of mobility, in the sense that we have people who are still coming north on foot. And I'm also interested in talking about infrastructure and the ways in which histories of the railroad and road infrastructure allow for these connections to be made. And in the histories, if I'm writing about Chicano, Mexican American, Chicanx, and their intersections with queer and current southern south to north migration issues, these distances get shorter. But I'm also interested in writing about art from this idea of proximities and distances, and feeling like and a lot of the attention to land art has sort of forgotten the settler colonialism and the histories of dispossession and the ways those histories continue to animate new readings of this work. You have the Galisteo gals. Mm-hmm. One day I'll be a Galisteo gal, I'm sure of it. Anyway, so I think that's an interesting sort of vantage point.
And Jasmine, you touched on this, a little bit in your opening remarks, but you were also, until recently, the editor of Burnaway, which is an art publication focused on art made in the U.S. South, and so
which also includes Cuba, Haiti, and the DR. So American South, as is its most expansive. Burnaway.org covers a huge swath of the country, which I feel like being anti-Southern is a new euphemism for being anti-Black, which is an anti-American sentiment. So when I talk to people about, there's really cool stuff going on in Memphis, there's really cool stuff going on in Knoxville, and people are like, why would I ever go there? And I'm like, well, because they're really important American cities. They're beautiful. They have tons of music history, art history. And people just that's...
I don't like ideas.
Yeah, I don't like ideas. And I feel that anti-Southern bias is really, really obvious when you see exhibitions of American art and every Southerner is dead. There is not, if I go to an exhibition and if I go to an exhibition about American art and there is not somebody living, breathing, working in the Southern United States, I don't participate, because I think I think that the coasts are very extractive. It's very popular to be a New York collector and fly down to Alabama to Joe Minter's African Village and just pull, it's such an extractive economy, which is what the South is known for. It's resource extraction, labor extraction, and the work that I have to do as a Southerner to even just get people to answer the phone. It's like a constant uphill battle to remind people that Atlanta's not this. I promise it's not this. But I think this is a bias that will outlive me, will outlive us. And my only goal is to try and like force, if someone asks me to write an exhibition catalog and there's not a living, working Southerner in it, I say no, because that's the only way that I feel that I can get people to give a damn about what people are living and working for down here.
And just to respond to that, I mean, in the art world, we're definitely in a moment of rediscovery, quote unquote, of artists who have been overlooked, specifically women artists, queer artists, and of course, artists of color. And I find a very hard, balance to strike, because you want to recognize all of these very important historical figures who are either, in their 70s, 80s, 90s, or have passed away. But at what expense do you do that to the living and breathing artists who also need the support to live and survive in, a country that is often not supportive of them, with, crazy inflation at the moment?
I mean, we're like, the South is like the place where like America loves to shove its garbage. Like, the South is the reason Trump is president. The South is the reason that, those ignorant rednecks or whatever. Whereas, like, usually when I do panels like this, I wear my Vote Warnock shirt because, one, I need to differentiate myself from the New Yorkers that are usually on the panel. And two, I need to remind people that the South has been churning and working and working and working. And who's the reason that Trump isn't president right now? It's everybody who voted in Atlanta, Georgia 6 times in less than 2 years for Raphael Warnock. So, like, we're out here working and nobody cares until we need to save the day. Then everybody's very curious about, like, what are you guys doing down here? And it's like, well, thanks, now that we had to save the day. But, like, where's the investment the other 365,
I feel like that's also what being a, like, quote, critic of color feels like, too, because I think, to what you were saying about this quote-unquote rediscovery moment, which of course is also extremely colonial language, I think that's the responsibility we've taken on, is to think about how you encounter a practice that, again, has been overlooked, has been undervalued, and amplify it and illuminate it in a way that is lathered with care. And yeah, just wanted to add that too.
I didn't push the button.
It might,
but that's me.
And so I think that leads, we've touched on this already, but we had a question about the joys and concerns of working in this field as people of color, as critics of color, who bring a different lens to art criticism, which of course has historically been dominated by white men, including in my publication, Art News, and others like it. And so why don't we go back to Raquel?
The joys?
Yeah.
The joys and pains, the sunshine and rain. Well, I mean, I think so I love language. I think writing for myself is an art, and it's I'm a syntax junkie, and I'm also an educator. I teach writing and I teach creative writing. I'm always curious to see who's in the room. I've also done a lot of community engagement, facilitation. I'm always curious to see, who are there writers in the room right now? Are there writers in the room? All right, we got 1, 2, 3. All right, 4. All right, and 6. All right, cool. So, I want to make sure we all know each other. We all introduce ourselves to one another, right? Because there might be opportunities to engage and just to keep tabs on each other's communities and whatnot. And that's a joy. A joy of connecting, of meeting people. The expo here is interesting. For me, if I meet a Southwest person, I'm like, okay, we should stay in touch, because there's a lot of a lot of good things happening and a lot of like really fun energies. And similarly, just like these two writers, Camille and Jasmine, incredible language, incredible analysis, and the images and the artists that we're trying to, well, to what, right? To offer some sort of antidote to sort of the impulse towards canonization. So and to write critically effusively, to write towards an intimate criticism, and to yeah, I don't know. I think to just be disruptive to sort of the impulse towards institutionalizing. So.
I would say mine has been similar, like having fellowship with other writers, with other curators, with other artists. And I would be remiss not to name one of my absolute North Stars, Jessica Lynn, who is currently in an MFA program, but is a really prolific critic. And it was actually the first ever piece of art criticism I ever read was by Jess, and it was called Criticism is Not Static. And in this essay, she's kind of grappling with, again, the notion of intimacy in arts writing and moving away from the impulse to kind of like find an artist, write the piece, find another artist, write the piece, and kind of bounce around, and instead to build these durational relationships with the people that she's writing about. And that has been, I mean, first of all, the joy of a fellow Black woman being the author of the first piece of art criticism I ever read has been a massive joy. But then to be able to embody her methodology and yeah, move at a slower pace, move at a more intimate pace has been a real joy. And I think that's also aided and abetted by my decision to stay in Chicago. I would say that's the biggest one, yeah, is fellowship.
Can I pause it? Can I stay on this image?
Yeah, maybe we can just stop.
Jamie, you got it?
So I'll let y'all in on a secret, is I am not an art person originally. I kind of fell into the art world because it's the only place where you can be freaky and like strange, because the literary landscape isn't really there anymore. So like the biggest joy for me, this is an image from Moreland Avenue in Atlanta. In 2020, in summer 2020, I signed up with the CDC to be a COVID vaccine trial volunteer. And I drove by this strip club every time I had to go give blood, get the shot, like all of that sort of routine. I plased Club Blaze over and over and over, and it sort of just got stuck in my mind. And I was like, I want to write about my experience as a COVID trial person, and how do I make that about art? Like, how do I work for an art magazine, I gotta sort of make it about art. But then I realized that that's not really important, because art is what we do to like bring our expression to life. And so any writing about life is inherently writing about art. So like, I also thought it was an art, like all the people who touched that vial of medicine that went into my arm, and the delivery drivers, and the people who make sure the freezer stays on. That is art, and that is art by community, and that is like the goal of humanity, as far as I'm concerned. That's the biggest joy for art for me.
All right, should we sneak back, starting with you, Jasmine, on the concerns?
Oh, concerns. Lots of concerns. Funding is impossible to access as an individual. It's just so time-consuming, from city to city, registering as a vendor. Like, the process to just get paid your $300 or whatever it is that you're getting paid is extremely onerous. Yeah. The application process for any sort of funding is way too long. And I'm kind of looking to New York and LA to fix this, because there's the common application for colleges, and you can just use that application without having to refill it over and over and over again. So Creative Capital, Andy Warhol, if you're out there, like, let's talk about like adapting a standard language for appealing for finances, because it's just not possible for individuals. So like that, money obviously is a huge issue, but also a lot of people don't think that it's appropriate for them to write about art, and that's like a whole mindset that's like even more difficult to like deal with. Like, I asked a comic book illustrator to submit a piece for me, and he was like, "Why? I write comic books." And I'm like, "You write comic books? Like, let's talk about your art. Let's like work on it." He was like, "I'm not a writer. I can't write art criticism." And I'm like, "We have to stop doing that, because if we want this pool to expand, we need to like be as wide as possible."
And just to respond to that, the other issue with the funding in this world is that it's often very project-based. So you have to, especially with the Warhol grants, you have to go in with a specific project, even if you're applying for the short form criticism, which is, a series of articles, essentially. And often you have to have an assignment secured, which can also be very difficult.
Absolutely. So Toni Morrison says this thing about how the function of racism is to operate as a distraction. And I think as, again, this number of critics of color can be tricky language, because I think, again, it functions as a distraction. And, like, we're called to testify to the challenges of what we do, which is absolutely important, and also detracts from opportunities to talk about the craft of what we do and to talk about the kind of like intricacies of what building a writing life on a practical level actually looks like. So just wanted to name that first of all, in tandem with a quote from one of my favorite writers named An Duplan. And An writes that liberation is not located in an alternate space or otherwise or other than. It's located in a third space, and that third space is the deepening of mundane reality. And I think because of the way that we are constantly reduced as people, as writers, it can be really, really difficult to deepen that mundane reality. And I think a challenge I face on a day-to-day basis is giving myself permission to move at a pace that allows me to hold my senses open, which is really what I consider our responsibility as writers to be, and then to filter that truth as unflinchingly as we can. But of course, obviously, it's difficult to do that when you're living in circumstances that, for all intents and purposes, are predicated on your shutdown, on your kind of peril almost. And the market aspect and the money thing totally plays a role there. The other concern I've had is, as someone who's grounded in Black feminist politics, as someone who's interested in writing in ways that hopefully move against capitalism and all of that, is that it can be really challenging to locate editors and to find people who support more kind of unruly or wayward work, or work that holds kind of the essence of Black rebellion and of that liberatory ethos. So, yeah.
Beautiful. So the bummers. Yeah, the bummers. Gosh, I think it's just the sort of the anti-populism, the elitism of spaces, art spaces.
Credentialism.
Sure, the gatekeeping, and also the fact that we have a crisis, an education crisis. Critical race theory, feminist LGBT studies, all that is being hindered at state levels. And being here, just walking through the halls and thinking about how a lot of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, first generation college students arrive to art by way of ethnic studies. And you have a lot of discipline fugitives. That is someone who is trained in sociology, but who's teaching photography, who's teaching Laura Aguilar or teaching other visual culture to talk about issues that economic conditions and other social conditions, and so all of the things that are by design.
Right, and that brings me to our critical lineage questions, because I think what people often don't understand is it's not that critics of color or writers who are people of color in this country writing have only just come into being recently, but they were coming at it from different fields. Often artists had to do it about themselves and their colleagues, the people in their I'm thinking of people like Amalia Mesa Baines, Gloria Anzaldúa. Those are two of the people whose work I reference a lot in my own thinking and when I approach writing. And so, yeah, maybe, Jasmine, you want to start on some of your, lineage.
I'm really excited about this part. Okay, so my entire reading and writing life goes back to the Pride of Chicago, Playboy magazine. The whole foundation of Playboy, not just as a magazine, but as like a comedy clubs, and they put out music and records and things like that. I'm very interested in Cold War masculinity because yes, because because I agree with like Adorno that like any poetry after the Holocaust is like that's where is the poetry after that, and what is the point of poetry after that? And I kind of feel that we're at a point where like, where is the poetry after children in cages? Where is the poetry after 6-year-olds are shot at school? There is no room for poetry for that. So the early Playboys, like 56 to 70, have such a wealth of incredible work by some people who we had to wait till they died, but we got really into it. But so this is the table of contents for my white whale Playboy issue, which I did just purchase, and I thought about bringing it with me. But you kind of can't tell, but we've got W. Somerset Maugham, Roald Dahl, James Baldwin, Vladimir Nabokov, Jean-Paul Sartre, Getty. We've got a 10-page report on demonstrations by James Farmer. It's just incredible. Like, if it's important in American history, it's in Playboy, as we're seeing now in New York, where the former president has been arraigned based on charges that he paid hush money to a former Playboy bunny. Like, any time that there's something important in American history, it's in Playboy. And like, the Atlanta child murders, James Baldwin wrote about them for Playboy. It's just a really interesting way to see how America honestly looked at itself. And I really, really love like rediscovering that like we've been dealing with the same problems, and we've been, maybe that this way didn't really work, but like, to join a Playboy club, all you had to do was be 18 and have $25. And when he found out that New Orleans and Miami weren't letting black people in, he bought them back from the franchise. It was like, Dick Gregory's going to perform here. You can't turn anybody away as long as they're 18 and as long as they have $25. So like the whole lens of my reading and writing life is through sort of that really Raymond Carver, Nabokov, that really like staring into the abyss of the end of history, because I think that's where we are now too. So.
Raquel, do you want to go next?
Sure. Los Angeles, Lynell George and her writings about Octavia Butler, Ruben Martinez, and his intimate criticism on Richard Rodriguez. And I mean, other critical lineages. I mean, I'm super stoked on Carolina Miranda being the art critic for the LA Times. Someone who's very just a populist approach to talking about art, writing about art that appeals to a range of audiences. Who else does that? I think those, for the time being.
And she recently published, I think today, an essay or a column on the Ligia Pape show that's at the Art Institute that I encourage you all to check out. Camille, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my formal kind of like education is in Black studies, and specifically in Black feminism. And that absolutely informs kind of the function of my practice and what I'm trying to do, but also I think has shaped the way that I will approach kind of like the process of a piece too. And I feel like my sentiments actually move countercurrent to what you're saying, in that I feel like poetry is really the thing that I'll draw from most often. And like specifically the poetry of someone like Lucille Clifton has been incredibly influential on me because she's able to go granular and universal at the same time. And I think that's what an artist like Turquoise or someone like Caroline Kent or Amanda Williams, who are other artists that I've written on, I think that's what their work is doing too. But a core tenet of Black feminism is being able to hold contradiction. And I think that kind of harkens back to some of the concerns we were saying too, is like, regardless of all the challenges any of us have faced, we continue to come to this work every day. And so to kind of embody that contradiction is something that feels like it's imbued with a little more ease when I remember I'm not the first person and not the first Black woman who has come kind of like in the face of these challenges. So it, again, both informs formally what happens on the page, but also the larger way that I consider and affirm the value of my practice and that of fellow writers as well.
And I want to respond to something you said earlier, Camille, which is talking about craft. And I know we kind of talked about this, about a piece you're proud of, but if there's another piece you want to talk about, I think it is important to talk about craft and how we approach, word choice, framing, tension in a piece, which you do need to draw the reader in, but at what point does that tension border on problematic, in which an editor can insert? So, Camille, why don't you start us off?
Totally. So another artist that I adore who works in Chicago and Virginia, Shawnee McElwain Holloway, made a kind of film series called I Would Have Said Goodbye If I Thought You Loved Me Back. And it's kind of moving through what happens after a romantic rupture in your life. How does one recover from a breakup? Which may seem like a platitudinal question, but I think we all understand how difficult and challenging that can be. And in our conversations, it became apparent to me that I would have to do more than simply describe and analyze and place in lineage what I was seeing, which are maybe the three main pillars of what art criticism is. It was clear to me that I'd also have to respond in a poetic register and insert kind of my own experience with how I've dealt with that kind of rupture in the piece as well. So it was in two parts. The first was the kind of description, analysis, placing in the lineage. And then the last piece was this kind of frenetic lyrical poem directly in response to the work. And so I think on a craft level, again, that allows me to do maybe the more formulaic version of what art criticism may be or be understood as, but then also insert myself directly in and have this kind of very emotive and sentimental cadence and tone to what I was writing. So it feels deeply personal as well. Yeah.
I also want to sort of respond to that because I have no formal education. I have a GED. I left high school right after Hurricane Katrina, and I never really looked back. And that when we talk about craft and people, so the majority of my time in the art world has been as an editor, which I really think. I want somebody to write about Toni Morrison's life as an editor before she became an author. Because I think having a editor of color is just as important as, a table full of other writers of color, because it makes the translation work less intense. I also am 100% never negative. I feel like there's a lot of nihilism in the art industrial complex, which I find so distressing. So most of what I write is funny, is lower brow, because I want as many people to read what I put out or what the magazine puts out. And I find that there's so much about art writing that is so pretentious, and it's like they chose to make this as difficult to get into as possible, where it's no, I'm gonna write an essay about Lil Nas X, and that's and I'm gonna mean every single word, because writing can be joyful, and I think that people think that art writing has to be really academic and really dour and really, really, really focused, where it's like, you can write about Lil Nas X if you want, you know? Like, art is such a big umbrella that we should be really exploring all of that.
Can I say one thing in response? I also feel like you're speaking to the fact that we have range, that our curiosities are multiple. And I think that's also something that can get lost in the sauce when we center around the kind of language of XYZ of color. It's like our imaginations have always been and have had to be so incredibly expansive. So yes, let's consider like Lil Nas X's music videos as a kind of compositional work.
Raquel?
Yeah, so let's see. I have a essay that I was first commissioned to do from the New Inquiry upon the passing of East Los Angeles photographer Laura Aguilar. And if you're unfamiliar with that name, she was a larger, corpulent Chicana, long-haired butch who would her most notable series were the Grounded series and the nature self-portraits of herself staging through different desert landscapes. And so her large body placed next to a series of boulders in Joshua Tree, for example. And so whatever this obituary became was also a comment on the fact that she passed away of diabetes. Complications from diabetes. Diabetes, fairly, it's a chronic disease that is manageable if you have access to the resources to manage the disease. And it's also the same disease that took Gloria Anzaldúa prematurely in 2004. So, that isn't lost on me. And so narrating an autobiographical entry point through the Plush Pony series, images, portraits of rough butch lesbians and their lovers, and at a bar, the Plush Pony in Northeast Los Angeles, playing that with the Latina Lesbian series. So playing a class dynamic and reading that through my own experience of playing East Los Angeles Chicana softball, bar league softball, and a bunch of educated college Chicanas that we were stuck up. Yeah, we were stuck up, and we played with working class Chicanas in the barrios, and how that dynamic played out, and reading that experience, or reading her work through that experience of in these places that were also part of Laura Aguilar's own experiences, the places that she frequented, the parks, and where we played softball, and the bars where she would, as a way to nullify her social anxiety, would offer $5 to patrons at the Plush Pony to take their portraits. And but also the Plush Pony portraits, these are anonymous. We don't know who these people are, versus the sort of the social, upwardly mobile aspirants of the Chicana professionals. And so that felt important to me to kind of like think through the way that class kind of animates our relationships.
We're getting close to time. We have about 10 minutes left. But I do know that Expo Chicago invited students. I don't know if any students are in the audience today, but
They're behind you, Max.
They're behind me. Okay. But I did, one of our final questions that we have, and if we have time, we'll open it up, was, what advice do you have to either your younger selves when you were starting out, or to students who are just starting out about, getting into this field and, committing yourself to writing and this work?
Pick a style and stay with it. I prefer Chicago manual of style, find a stylistic language that appeals to you and stick with it, because that'll save you so much time when you deal with editors to find out they have the same house style as me. I tell everybody that you should be reading for 2 hours for every 1 hour you write, because the only way to become a better writer is by reading other writers. It's tough when you're like, oh man, 2 to 1, that's a really tough ratio. I can't really in good faith, encourage young people to come into the industry now, Because the pay is so impossible. I'm currently getting my MFA at Bard right now, just so that I can like maybe get a job later because I don't have a degree because this world is so credentialism focused. So yeah, 2-to-1, pick a style. When you pitch magazines, my least favorite thing when I would read a pitch is if I have to scroll multiple times in your email. I need to be able to see what you want to talk about, why you're the person to talk about it, and how quick you can do it right there. And that'll like, I was in charge of a region that, 14 states plus an island. I don't have time. And if you are pitching to art magazines, most of your editors don't have time either. So quick and to the point style, 2-to-1.
And I'll add to that, as an editor, why you feel the article is necessary to publish now.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily have to have a news peg. Art News does prefer that, but there has to be urgency to the story you're trying to tell in a way.
I belong to community. Be in conversation with other people who are coming up with you. If you're the writer, make friends with artists and poets and go to everything. Just be present in your community. You give what you get.
I think while it is difficult to build a viable life as an art critic, I feel very strongly that it is by the introduction of new voices who are able to provide that structural critique while continuing to do the work that will, completely transform this industry, which I really believe is a possibility. In the same way that art is a gesture of aliveness, art criticism is the same thing. But the other thing about being in the art world and advice that Jessica Lynn offered me early on was that just because you write about art doesn't mean you need to be involved in the kind of like social choreography and constrictions that the art world, quote unquote, kind of demands of you. And so when I think about how seriously I took myself when I was first beginning, which is still the case, but I think I've managed to loosen that a little bit, but definitely embody the kind of like waywardness and unruliness that I'm attracted to in the artists that I write about, is advice I would give myself in retrospect. But really, like, we need younger, fresher, more critical voices to be on this stage with us and to be in publications with us. And so I would encourage any students who are in the audience to come speak with us after. You can find our work online and like not hesitating to reach out, because it really is by being in fellowship that viability can kind of come to the surface, and that support can realize itself in ways that you might not even imagine.
Yes, group membership. I am on the board of AICA USA, which is Art Critics International USA, and the average member age of that group is 67. So please, like, look into whatever sort of group that you can be in, whether that's PEN or AICA or something like that. And also, like, write for fun. You have to, like, write for pleasure, because you'll burn out. So, like, the shirt that I'm wearing right now, does anybody recognize this logo? No? No? Not one? Okay. You? Yes! Okay. Okay. So this logo is Archive of Our Own, which is the Hugo Award-winning, feminist-founded fan fiction archive. So I am a Hugo Award-winning fan fiction author. It's fun, it's free, there's tons of community around it, there's tons of community who will read and edit it for you. Find a world that is like still pleasurable for you to write in. So Archive of Our Own, check it out, it'll change your life.
And I think we have time for one audience question. If there is one, there's a mic. Does anyone have a question? All right. Then I will ask one final question. The one question we didn't touch on is safe homes, and I think that's a good place to probably end. I think who suggested that in our pre?
Not I.
Was it? Camille or Jen?
So finding a place for your writing, that's what Max is talking about. Like what are safe places to try and put your writing in? And this afternoon I went to Quimby's, which is Chicago, like one of my favorite places here. And basically focuses on zines. There aren't a lot of safe homes for weird creative writing that will pay. Burnaway will pay. We are wage certified, which is another thing that I think more people should do as a group membership. But it's best if you focus on one sort of overarching, like Burnaway, Southern art. Okay, I can do that. The Baffler, that's like cultural criticism, maybe some fiction. You really just have to like, do I need to place a poem? Do I need to place a cultural essay? And really like, where do your favorite writers put their stuff?
Yeah. I think the looking for where your favorite writers publish is a great tip. And then also the other wonderful thing about being in sincere community and fellowship with fellow writers is we all exchange stories about which editors we've had really positive, nourishing kind of experiences with. So Bryn at Burnaway is someone that I champion and have absolutely adored my experience with her. But I think it's really that, like I will never pitch now without asking at least 3 of my fellow writer friends if they have kind of worked with this publication before, and if so, which editor they would recommend. So really kind of protecting one another in that way is how I have found safe homes for my work. And then also self-publishing, like on Substack or a website or a blog. Yeah, exactly.
The artist run space, I think, still a safe, fun space for making work, whether it's offering a writing as some sort of as a piece or as a poem or as something that passes for a catalog essay. For fun and for community, and to also see my scene grow.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to end the conversation. I want to thank everyone in the audience, and of course, I want to thank these 3 lovely panelists who all agreed to share about their work and join me for this dialogue section, and to Expo Chicago for bringing us all together here at the fair.
Thank you
very
for having
much.
us.
Thank you, Max.